Oh, hell, Internet. I'm back again with another chapter of the Analects of Confucius, despite the fact I have no particular expertise to rate it as I'm going to, but that's fine. It's just to be taken in that spirit. And obviously, in reading it in English, I am aware that there's other nuances that come from the particular choice of Chinese characters, which I'm not getting. So, yeah, I'm just going to take a look at it from my sort of culturally distant perspective. I'm rating it according to 4 criteria, which I'm pulling right out of my ass, and that is that these aphorisms should be timeless, they should be inarguable, which is not that they are literally inarguable, but they have that kind of mic drop energy, that they are concise, and S. So, number one is quite long. I have also got ratings for this that I put already, and I reserve the right to change them, but not in the case of the first one. The master said of Gung Ye Chang that he was a suitable man to marry, for though he had been in prison, it was through no wrongdoing of his, so he gave him his own daughter to wife. The master said of Nanyung that when the country was well governed, he would not be set aside, and when the country was ill governed, he would escape suffering and death. So he gave him his elder brother's daughter to wife. I've labelled this 2 stars and too specific, although I think specific is actually the S, but by that I mean specific in the lesson it's teaching. And what is the lesson that's being taught here? That you should look out for your elder brother's daughter more than your own daughter? I mean, obviously, the first guy, even though he's been in prison, is not supposedly a bad guy, but yeah, I'm not quite sure what the general lesson is that's being taught here. So 2 stars. Also, not very concise. Next one. The master said of Tzu Qian, an honourable man indeed is such a one as he. Were the state of Lu without men of honour, how could he have acquired this excellence? So I've given that 3 stars, the second half there, were the state of Lu without men of honour, he would not have acquired this excellence, is the implication. So there's a sort of reinforcement of virtue and the sort of trickle-down virtue which Confucius was sort of a proponent of. Okay, next one. Someone remarked, a virtuous man is young, but he is not ready of speech. What need has he of ready speech, said the master. The man who is always ready with his tongue to others will often be disliked by them. I do not know about his virtue, but what need has he of ready speech? I've given it 3 stars again, and certainly I can see how the person who's always ready to with their opinions is often to be not disliked necessarily, but is not always the easiest conversationalist, shall we say. Underneath, I've written the ready of speech often put their foot in their mouth. But the original criticism is about confidence, and I guess the master is therefore saying, well, he doesn't need confidence, but is that really the case? I mean, I wish that were maybe the case, that people who were competent, even if they were not confident, were raised up in social situations. But it's not always what we see now, is it? Next up, the master wanted to engage Chi Tiao Kai in office, but he replied, I still lack confidence for this, whereat the master was pleased. But he replied, Chi Tiao Kai, I still lack confidence for this, whereat the master is pleased. I've given this 4 stars, and yes, I think so. And I've written imposter syndrome as a virtue. But really, it's just showing that this guy, Chi Tiao Kai, was expressing the relevant level of humility and possibly just not wishing to be in post, because it is the people who don't wish to be in these higher posts which are, provided they have the skill set, often the best people to assign. Okay. Next, the master said, my doctrines make no progress. I will get me on a raft and float away upon the sea. If anyone accompanies me, will it not be you? Tsulu, who is you apparently, on hearing this was pleased, whereupon the master said, you is fonder of daring than I. He also exercises no discretion. What? So underneath, one must be somewhat brash to make progress. Better to beg forgiveness and ask permission, which is a well-known phrase. I put 4 stars by this. I don't seem to understand it as much as that. So you is the more daring one? Is that the way that one makes progress? one must be somewhat brash. Is that what he's saying? Sorry, I think I might be misunderstanding this one, but it seems like the master is praising you for his audacity and his willingness to take on unpleasant tasks, perhaps. But I don't know. I don't know. I think I'd have to go 3 stars rather than 4 stars because I don't think I really understand it. Okay, next up though, the master addressing Tzu Kung said, "Which is the superior, you or Hui?" I should be who is the superior, you, Tzu Kung, or Hui? "How dare I look at Hui?" he, Tzu Kung, answered. "Hui hears 1 point and from it apprehends the whole 10. I hear 1 point and apprehend a second therefrom." The master said, "You are not equal to him, I grant you. You are not equal to him." I've given it 3 stars and I've labelled that it's easily misinterpreted. Yes. And I feel like the point is, Hui, although he is quick to apprehend things, is not necessarily therefore better. And when the master says you are not equal to him, that doesn't necessarily mean that he is the better one, does it? So 3 stars, because yes, I think it is nonetheless easily misinterpreted. But then maybe that's the point in some of these. You know, the whole point in any of the philosophical texts that are written in this aphoristic form is that maybe they aren't always to be taken as making a specific case. That's true with Confucius, that's true with Nietzsche in many ways. Oh, before I move on, I forgot to say the title of this book 5 is Concerning Certain Disciples and Others. And we can see, of course, that many of the named disciples, who I have no knowledge of other than what they say here, are brought into this. Anyway, moving on. Tsai Yu spending the daytime in sleep. The master said, "Rotten wood is unfit for carving, and a wall of dirt unfit for plastering. As to you, what is the use of reproving him?" "Formerly," he continued, "my attitude towards others was to hear what they said and give them credit for their deeds. Now my attitude towards others is to listen to what they say and note what they do. It is through you that I have made this change." Which is subtly different, and I'm not quite sure I fully understand why. Note what they do, not necessarily give them credit for their deeds. Listen to what they say. What is the difference between that and hearing what they say? But it is through you that I have made this change. So it would seem that this Tsai Yu has in some sense disappointed the master. And there is a cautionary tale there. Okay, next up, the master said, "I have never seen a man of strong character." Someone remarked, "There is Shen Cheng." "Cheng?" said the master. "He is under the influence of his passions, and so how can he be possessed of strength of character?" So, passions, strength of passion, or even strength of opinion, possibly thereby, is not necessarily strength of character here. What, therefore, is strength of character? Is it a strength of integrity? A commitment to one's ideology? But then are you not just an ideologue and therefore at risk of becoming a zealot or at the very least a dogmatist? I put 3 stars here. It is an interesting point, but yeah, 3 stars I think is fine. Next up, Tzu Kung said, "What I do not wish others to do to me, that also I wish not to do to them." "Tzu," observed the master, "that is a point to which you have not attained." 5 stars, obviously, and why not? This is the golden rule itself, and the golden rule some 500 years before the time of Jesus of Nazareth. I point that out not to suggest that Jesus of Nazareth had access to Confucius and therefore took the golden rule from him, but merely to point out that it is a rather obvious moral stricture which has arisen many times throughout the history of Homo sapiens. And yes, now what is this second point? "Tzu," observed the master, "that is a point to which you have not attained." I don't quite understand what it means. Is he saying that Tzu is making a sort of moral insight beyond his training? But I mean, 5 stars for the golden rule, certainly. Next, Tzu Kung again. Tzu Kung said, "Our master's culture and refinement all may hear, but our master's discourse on the nature of man and the laws of heaven, it is not given to all to hear." I've put 1 star, but can I say why? I've noted beware Philistinism. I suppose that beware Philistinism is the point of Tzu Kung's commentary here, because it is through widely disseminating texts that people come to use them in a variety of different ways, and this by the gatekeeping intellectuals is sometimes seen to be a bad thing. And certainly can cause problems, to be sure. But Philistinism is this sense of taking something higher and using it in a very utilitarian way, using it in a kind of base fashion to achieve some more, everyday, mundane end. And you can see more about that if you go to the Hannah Arendt essay, The Crisis in Culture, or my video upon it. But at the same time, this is from Tzu Kung, or possibly from Confucius, but either way, it's not necessarily surprising. This is more of a kind of Platonic, elitist, you cannot allow the masses to have access to the scriptures in a sense because they will inevitably misinterpret it. From the same Arendtian basis, ironically, I am largely against this idea that no, the people must be kept away from wisdom because they are not fit to interpret it. I think the bearers of wisdom, the interpreters of wisdom, need to do a better job of bringing it to the people, or else you will inevitably find that the people will cease to trust those curators. And I think this is fair to say. And again, the crisis in culture does kind of get at this. There is a sense in which those who curate the culture do a good job. They do a service for society at large. But only in as much as they do it with the requisite humility. Let's move on. This is Tsulu. Tsulu is you, who we saw on the previous one about the raft. When Tsulu heard any precept and had not yet been able to put it into practice, he was only afraid lest he should hear some other. I'd too much to learn. There is indeed too much to learn. But also, if you are not yet accomplished in some precept and you have to take on more information, the danger is that education becomes a burden in that regard. And I think most students, especially kids, who, as much as I am a teacher and I understand the value and need for education, I do understand why it seems onerous to children, even when it's something that they do have to accept on some level. I've given this 3 stars in the margin, but I'm going to up it to 4 stars. 4 stars. Okay. Tzu Kung again asked, on what ground has Kung Tzu received his posthumous title of Wen? He was clever and fond of learning, replied the master, and he was not ashamed to seek knowledge from his inferiors. That is why he has been styled cultured. Wen, W-E-N, I'm guessing refers to cultured. I'm going to check that. Tzu Kung is asking of Kung Tzu, who are obviously 2 different people, and I've given this 4 stars. Yeah, I think so. You have to kind of accept some of the missing context, and of course, including the lack of context from changing the language. But the idea that somebody got a posthumous title for being clever and fond of learning, and crucially, not ashamed to seek knowledge from his inferiors. That is why he has been styled cultured. And I spoke for a bit too long, so I'll just jump in and say that I referred back to the crisis in culture again, and the idea that Arendt puts forward that on some level, and especially in the Vita Activa perhaps, we do need to look down towards the baser parts of the Vita Activa, that somehow some of the most fundamental ideas, some of the most beautiful ideas still come from what might be called those lower levels. And that will inform what I say next. This idea of seeking knowledge from one's inferiors does seem to be associated with that. The idea that however high you rise, there is always a sense in which you are going to be looking down, not in judgment, but in curiosity. And we're almost getting back to the idea of Thomasane, the wonder of the philosopher. The master remarked of Tzu Chan that he had 4 of the ideal man's characteristics. In his personal conduct, he was serious. In his duty, he was superior. In his duty to his superior, he was deferential. In providing for the people, he was beneficent. And in directing them, he was just. 4 stars, simply a good list of the qualities of the noble man. And yeah, the term noble or lord or aristocrat is one that we have looked at in various other videos. I'm not going to go into it here. I think I've gone into depth on several other points already. But this idea of somebody who is a superior character, not by their status, but by their actions. And that the actions that they do will then provide them with the status. But that is not in and of itself an indication of their superiority. So yeah, 4 stars. And same for the next one. The master said, Yen Ping Chung was gifted in the art of friendship. Whatever the lapse of time, he maintained towards his friends the same consideration. So after you hadn't seen people for a long time. Actually, I think they said 4 stars, but maybe I'll just drop that to 3, because, I mean, it is a good part. Well, no, keep it at 4. Yeah, the art of friendship and being able to manage social relations. Being gifted in the art of friendship is a good skill to have. Oh, this one's got a question mark. I didn't rate it. The master said, Tsang Wen Chung kept a large tortoise in an edifice on whose pillar tops were representations of hills and on its king posts of water plants. Of what sort was his wisdom? And I have to say, I have no idea. So clearly, in order to really capture the meaning of this one, you would need to know what kind of thing a tortoise would represent, and the keeping of a tortoise, and the conditions in which you keep a tortoise. What are hills? What are water plants in the kind of representational metaphors of traditional Chinese? What about the characters that you need to use for that? And then to say, of what sort was his wisdom? So on one level, I have to give it 1 star because I can make neither head nor tail of it. On the other hand, I have to not comment because clearly I am not picking up what this aphorism is putting down. So, wow. And I'm not going to go on at too much length because I'm not going to understand clearly, but water plants typically grow at the bottom of hills, in the valleys somewhat, and the king post would typically be above the pillar top, so that would put the water plants above the hills, which maybe speaks ill of his wisdom, but really I don't know. Okay. Chi Wen-su used to think thrice before acting. The master, hearing of it, said, "Twice would do." Don't overthink, which is certainly true. I've given it 5 stars, and it is true. But then the thought arises, how do you know when you're not overthinking? How do you know which level of thought is the correct place to stop? Sometimes you might need to think thrice. Sometimes maybe even once would do. Carpe diem, as they say. On the other hand, if you carpe diem, you cannot look before you leap. 5 stars still, obviously. Next, the master said, while good order prevailed in his state, Ning Wu Tzu was a wise man. When the state fell into disorder, he was a fool. His wisdom may be equalled, his folly cannot be equalled. In other words, to allow the good to come to bad is a terrible thing. I've said 2 stars, but no, I think 3 stars. And maybe this is another cautionary tale for the person who comes into power in good times. And when the state fell into disorder, they are, in a sense, revealed to be a fool because they did not have the wisdom to guide the state through harder times, perhaps. His wisdom may be equalled. His folly cannot be equalled because he allowed the state to fall into disrepair. Now, perhaps there are times in which extenuating circumstances may exist, however. Once, when Yen Yuan and Tzu Lu were standing by him, the master said, "Suppose each of you tells his wishes." I should like, said Zulu, to have carriages and horses and light furs to wear, so as to share them with my friends, nor would I feel any annoyance if they spoiled them. I should like, nor would I feel any annoyance if they spoiled them. That's the end of Zulu. I should like, said Yen Yuan, never to make a display of my good qualities, nor a parade of my merits. May we hear the master's wishes? Asked Zulu. They would be, said the master, to comfort the aged, be faithful to my friends, and cherish the young. I've put 3 stars. It's quite long, and there's all sorts of stuff in there, which is generally good. I've put different strokes, ? Different strokes for different folks, being the idiom which comes from, I believe, British English. So, Zulu would like to have carriages and horses and light furs to wear, so as he could share them and not feel any annoyance if they spoilt them. He would like to have enough that he could afford the largesse. And I should like to be humble, says Yen Yuan, never to make a display of good qualities nor a parade of my merits. He didn't say he wouldn't wish to have them, he just says he would not wish to make a display of them. And then the master says, to comfort the aged, be faithful to my friends, and cherish the young, which one could argue could be sort of a larger section which encompasses both of the earlier ones. The 2 disciples, in a way, are focusing on aspects of their lives rather than a general will, which, it has to be said, is really what the master was asking for them in the first place. Suppose each of you tells his wishes. Or is the master implying that by his wider and more advanced wish that he is demonstrating his moral superiority? I'm not getting that tone, but maybe, I don't know. Next up, the master said, it is all in vain. I have never yet seen a man who could perceive his own faults and bring the charge home against himself. I've said this is valid frustration. I've given it 4 stars. Absolutely. And yes, it's kind of the frustration of the person who wants humanity to be politically better, but recognizes that there is some sense in which we are all doomed to be blind to our own faults. Is that really true, though? Is there no other way? And of course, Confucius, Master Mo, Lao Tzu, as well as obviously many of the Greek, Persian, and presumably African and Native American thinkers, although their works have not survived so much, were thinking in the same way. How is politics able to transcend the tribe, I would say, not human nature, but the tribe? And finally, the master said, even in a hamlet of 10 houses, there must be men as conscientious and sincere as myself, but none as fond of learning as I am. I've given that 1 star, probably because of the ego it implies, but let us just be a little bit cautious. Even in a hamlet of 10 houses, even in a small population, a small community, there must be men as conscientious and sincere as myself. I guess he's kind of setting himself up as the standard there, possibly with tongue slightly in cheek, you've got to give him that. But none as fond of learning as I am. Well, how do you know? Even in the hamlet of 10 houses. Are you sure that in a hamlet of 10 houses there is not going to be any so fond of learning as you are? The note I've written underneath is the ubiquitous necessity of wisdom, being a little bit pompous myself, I think. Is he perhaps saying that in a small community like a hamlet, the complexity of the system, the nature of the community, and the life that they lead is likely sufficiently simplistic that perhaps these grand visions of wisdom and learning are perhaps not necessary in some way, and yet they would still be to improve it? Well, maybe he doesn't say that. And that's it. That's the end of Book 5 of the Analects, and my casual rating on them. Like I said, I'm not an expert in any respect, and I have no particular cultural sensitivity to Confucius in his original context, so take that in mind. But I hope you've enjoyed my ramblings nonetheless, and I shall see you in the next one. Bye for now.